Here we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mediation and Beyond YouTube channel. Thanks so much for coming by. I'm super excited today to have Josh Kirschbaum, attorney Josh Kirschbaum, who has more than 20 years of experience in education and education law, most notably in the areas of special education law and the representation of children with special needs. He completed his mediation training at the Harvard Negotiation Institute at Harvard Law School and the Good Shepherd Mediation Program in Philadelphia. He is a member of the IACP and the Collaborative Law Professionals of Southeast Pennsylvania Practice Group. Josh completed his collaborative law training through the Connecticut Council for Non-Adversarial Divorce and has focused his practice on helping divorcing parents of children with special needs, definitely essential. He has taught special education law as an adjunct professor of law at Temple University's Beasley School of Law and worked as a Medicaid eligibility advocate for children with special needs with the Pennsylvania Health Law Project. Before practicing law, Josh was a public school teacher in Newton, Mass. Love our school teachers. He experienced both the mediation and collaborative law processes during his own collaborative divorce and is deeply committed to helping others find peaceful resolutions to their conflicts. Josh is magna cum laude graduate of Amherst College and a cum laude graduate of Temple University Beasley School of Law. So thanks for coming today, Josh. It's really nice to have you on here.
Colleen, thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I really enjoy about you is our backgrounds in both education and dealing with special ed and dealing with the divorce arena. And so not a lot of people really think about that. I think a lot of people don't think about education and divorce for one thing, never mind education and families who have children of special needs. So can you speak to a little bit about your thoughts on divorce surrounding children with special needs and the families?
Sure. Yeah, and I really want to echo what you just said. A lot of people don't think about this, and I really want to say I want to include myself among those people. It took a very long time and many years of working as a lawyer and as a mediator, and many years of just living before I even realized the intersection between those two things.
Mm-hmm.
I came to this. It was a kind of a long journey to getting to the point of realizing that there is this really significant intersection between mediation, special needs law, and education. And I found myself standing right at the intersection of those three things, realizing, wow, this is really something. I wonder who else is out there doing this, and finding that there's very few people that were looking at this. Not nobody. There definitely are people that have come to this as well. But it was really striking to me that I, who had been immersed in education as a teacher, who had been immersed in working with people with special needs, both as an advocate and as a lawyer for so many years, it took me decades before I realized that there was this intersection. So I just want to say, folks who have not really thought about this before, you're in good company.
Yes.
And I guess what I realized was that, you know, when I worked with families as a lawyer, when I was representing them in disputes with public school districts about special education services, all of my clients were parents. And they were all parents of kids with special needs. That's the nature of the work that I did. And I focused my legal practice on representing the legal interests of children, specifically children, and in a pretty broad way. While most of my work was special education law, that wasn't 100% of my work. I did a lot of other work related to special needs law as well. But the one area I never practiced in, quite on purpose, was divorce law. I stayed away from it. I did not want to be a divorce lawyer because I had ideas in my mind about what that would be like and about experiences that I knew other lawyers had had being divorce lawyers. And I thought, I don't want anything to do with this. It seems really unpleasant.
Yes.
And so I sort of steered away from marital law and family law in that sense. However, because all of my clients were parents, I worked with so many families, a good number of my clients were divorced. So they came to me as already divorced parents who had a child, say, with autism, and they were continuing to co-parent the child, and they were having significant issues with getting the kids the educational services that they needed. And so they were still working together in this context of advocating for their child, but they were divorced. And that wasn't the problem as long as they were on the same page about it.
Right.
And I realized that, of course, that was true even if the parents were married. There was no problem unless the parents didn't agree on what the kid needed. Then there was a problem. But what I realized with the parents who were divorced was that none of them, and I think I can say this categorically, none of them in all my years had ever really dealt with the special legal and logistical issues and emotional issues that surround raising a child who has special needs while they were going through their divorce. The divorce process never dealt with it. And it became clear to me over the years that the reason why no one had ever dealt with it was because, frankly, nobody was thinking about it. And the lawyers who were working on those cases, they were all pretty much all cases where the parents got divorced and worked with lawyers. Probably a few of them worked with mediators, but probably most of them were working with lawyers. Those lawyers were excellent lawyers who knew a lot about family law and who knew a lot about divorce law, but didn't know anything really about special education law,
Right.
didn't know anything about special needs law, because law is very specialized. Lawyers tend to focus on what they know, and when they don't know something or it's a different area, they usually refer it out to somebody else because they don't want to mess it up. Very understandable. I definitely experienced that as a lawyer. If somebody came to me with a tax issue, I would tell them, nope, I'm not your guy. Go talk to a tax lawyer. And I learned over the years that lawyers who did not practice in the area of special education law or special needs law really didn't want to get involved in it because they realized there was a lot they didn't know and they didn't want to mess it up. So I wound up working with families who were, had been divorced for years, who never dealt with these issues during the divorce process. And now we're trying to sort of navigate and figure out how do we effectively co-parent and deal with these issues that are coming up when we've already done the divorce. It's really hard. Sometimes they have to go back to court to deal with issues about, for example, who gets to make educational decisions.
Mm-hmm.
They were going to handle settlement agreements that they might have with the school district. Really nettlesome stuff that is very hard to deal with once the divorce is already over. And that kind of planted a seed in my head, which later on, years later, when I was going through my divorce and I discovered collaborative law as a method for resolving divorces, then I realized while I was going through that process that, my goodness, people who are going through divorce, who have a child with special needs, really do need special help. Because there are so many issues that come up, even a divorce that does not involve children or does not involve children with special needs, they're complicated and they're emotional. But when you have a family that is, in a sense, restructuring, reorganizing itself, it's not a situation where the mom and the dad are never going to talk to each other again, never going to see each other again, or the child is fairly able to adjust to that situation. If you're going to have a situation where your child is going to have ongoing special needs for the rest of their life, which could be the rest of your life, and you're kind of both committed to being involved in that child's life in one way or another, your divorce is not simply just an end and a separation and a split and goodbye and good luck. You're rebuilding and restructuring your family, and you're having to figure out how to do that in a way that's going to meet the needs of your child for the rest of their life. That's a very different situation that requires a very different set of questions, a different knowledge base to really help a family navigate it. And so what I realized was, when I transitioned out of doing effectively litigation, effectively representing parents against school districts, and I segued into a career as a mediator, as somebody who was involved as a dispute resolution and a conflict resolution specialist. I was bringing 20 plus years of experience having worked in education and education law and in working with families that have kids with special needs. And I was sitting on this new wealth of knowledge and experience as a dispute resolution expert. And I realized I could really help people in this situation. I could help a family navigate a divorce when they have a child with special needs. I could help their mediator. I could help their lawyers. And I can also help families that are in conflict with their school districts, because I know firsthand how difficult and ineffective the litigation process is for resolving disputes like that. So I realized that the whole dispute resolution world, the whole mediation world, has something very special to offer families that have kids with special needs. Those families need a way to resolve disputes and a way to navigate disputes that is much more efficient, much more effective, much more interest-based than litigation ever can be. And frankly, faster and less expensive than litigation ever can be. And so I started to go out and interview families, talk with lawyers and mediators, and actually put myself out there as somebody who could help families, people with special needs in navigating disputes and challenges of all sorts, but in particular, the divorce and the special education fields.
Well, that's a lot in there, Josh.
There's a lot
And
in
thank
there.
you for sharing how you came into this role. And, you know, having this similar background with as yourself, a little different, having been an educator, and in a situation where we have inclusion. So, you know, it's an inclusive school and inclusion. So you're teaching everybody. And
Right.
then having gone on to have a therapy practice for a long time, and then segued that into my mediation practice, I could clearly see everything you're speaking to, which, because when you have families that come in and they don't get along, they're not on the same page, getting those families to a level of trust with each other, because mom may have stayed home doing everything for the child. Dad was, you know, as mothers sometimes would say, well, he wasn't there to do all the tube feeding or whatever was necessary, or get him changed, or the homework, or all the, you know, get him in and out of the vehicle, like all of those things that families have to deal with, I think is at the heart of a good mediation with families who have children of special needs. It's really getting them on the same page.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head, Colleen. I mean, when you and I talked originally, there was so many nodding heads. We realized very quickly that we were talking the same language and acknowledging the same realities. And I think that what it comes down to is, you know, it's kind of that word special and special needs. It's every family situation is very different from one another. And when you have, like, so even if you have two families that both have a child with autism, their experiences can be very different from each other, and the needs can be very different. And what these families often find themselves in are situations where the regular system, the way things work for most people, just doesn't work for them. Their families aren't set up to groove with the typical educational model, the typical divorce model, the typical legal structure that we often find ourselves in just in everyday life. Just doesn't work for families that are contending with a family member who can't navigate the world the way a typical random person would. So in the divorce context, for example, things like your typical divorce that involves even a custody schedule, even sharing custody, it's just a whole different reality when you have a child who can't transition from one house to another, who needs one stable, consistent place to live. That's not a situation that our divorce laws were ever designed to handle.
Absolutely.
Just in the same way as our educational systems are not designed to necessarily handle kids that have needs that are very different from the typical situation. So I think what we both realized, you and I both realized, is what these families need is they need a dispute resolution mechanism that's flexible. They need one that actually gives them the decision-making power to create decisions that work in their very unique situations. And litigation is just not that at all. Litigation is the exact opposite of that. It's basically a one-size-fits-all process that has a set of rules and a set of standards that simply doesn't bend and flex the way a family that has an atypical situation is going to need. And so what you and I both realized is that mediation is actually a tailor-made process for families, kids with special needs, right?
Absolutely. And you know, the thing I found most interesting, years ago, I had a case, family special needs case. They both, I'm here in Connecticut, and they have the parenting classes. So they went to 2 different towns for their required parenting classes in order to be divorced. And in those parenting classes, I always like feedback. Well, how was the parenting class? And they were like, oh, it was great if you didn't have a special needs child because it was never even addressed.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's just like, that's like going to school, never having a special needs class, or teachers not being informed about things, like about how to do what we need to do to get our information across in the best possible way. And I was floored, and I realized, like, we're not the only state that doesn't have our curriculums up to date. Like, that is across the board.
Yes. And you know, if you don't have a child with special needs, or you're not caring for somebody with special needs, we kind of have the luxury of really not having to, with the unearned privilege of not really having to confront that. But when, you know, maybe you've had the experience of talking with somebody who uses a wheelchair, and they'll tell you, you know, spend a day or a week in a wheelchair and just try to go about your everyday life. And you'll quickly realize just how poorly set up the world is for somebody in a wheelchair. Well, that's going to be true for people who are autistic, people that have emotional regulation issues, people who have learning disabilities. We call them special needs because they're special, because they're not typical, they're unique. And so any system or any structure that is set up for kind of mass consumption just isn't going to work in these situations. And of course, if you happen to be in one of those situations, you're going to find out over and over again, it's going to hit you over the head on an everyday basis, just how many things just were not made for you. And that's a very isolating and alienating kind of a feeling that, like, you know, you suddenly start to realize that the world wasn't built for a family like yours, and that is unfair. And so what families do is they try really hard to come up with creative ways of coping and of navigating. And oftentimes that works, and people get by. But when you confront the legal system, it's a whole different world. It's a whole different story, particularly because the people that normally help you navigate the legal system, lawyers, don't necessarily know how to handle your situation, right?
Yeah.
And so you need people who not only can navigate the legal system, but can help you navigate the legal system. And when that legal system, like, for example, the special education system, is so convoluted, uncertain, vague, mushy, imprecise, it's often a feeling of, a lot of families would tell me that it feels like the emperor just has no clothes. Like, these laws just don't make any sense. They don't work. And they find themselves desperately needing solutions, but not really knowing a path that they can take to reach.
And not knowing, and not able to have the conversations between themselves about how to figure out solutions. And I think that's where mediation comes in, and not necessarily litigation, because there's really nothing to fight about here. Being more on the same page is better for everybody, because stressed out parents, whether you have your typical kids or whether you have kids with special challenges, doesn't help anybody, right? So that taking that stress out and putting the parents in charge of creating solutions around honest conversations around how your family dynamic works. I can't emphasize enough that the place of mediation is the best suited for this situation.
Yeah, it's the best suited for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, we've talked about how it gives the parties control over the solutions, right? Parties can agree to pretty much whatever they want. They're not limited to whatever remedies the law might have, or they can create solutions on their own, right? And as long as it's not illegal, what they're agreeing to, which is really not much of an issue,
right?
They have amazing flexibility, right? But there are other things about the mediation process that I think we realize are just perfect for situations like this. Number one, you know, mediation, one of the hallmarks of mediation, right, is that it's confidential and it's voluntary, right? And the mediator is neutral.
Yes.
Okay, these things really help in situations like this, because remember, right, mediation is a coming together of parties that are in conflict. It's not only the family, it's not only the parents. In the special education dispute, you've got the school district.
Right.
And the district is trying to navigate the same legal labyrinth that the family is, except they're doing it as the district, not as the family.
Mm-hmm.
They have legal obligations and legal rights that they have to abide by. And they need a solution that's going to work for them too. And when the process is confidential, that's a way that people can actually start to talk openly and honestly with each other, and trust can be established. Because really, what they're trying to do is they're trying to carve a path together, a way forward together, which is going to require trust. And any process that erodes trust or that encourages or fosters people not really telling the full, honest truth, right? Which the litigation process is exactly what it does. It's not that it encourages people to lie so much, but it encourages people to be very, very careful about what they're saying, how they're saying it.
Right.
That erodes trust, but the mediation process is confidential. And so at least in theory and in practice, when it's done right, parties can talk more openly and freely about what they need and what their underlying interests are. Because it's voluntary, the only parties that are going to be in that conversation are ones that want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the most beautiful things about mediation. It's sort of, to me, it's like the dirty little secret. Why is mediation so successful? Because it only involves people that want to be there.
Absolutely.
Mediation, one side is often being dragged into it by the other and they can't get out, right? So that doesn't help. So it's the nature of mediation, the voluntary, confidential, party-driven aspects of that process that are just perfectly suited for situations where the parties need to be able to create solutions that don't exist in the legal framework that they're in.
Right. And I think adding to, the party driven, but it's solution focused. And that's what I love about mediation is like the goal is to come to an agreement. The goal is for two people to navigate challenging conversations, see the other side, pause for a minute, but to come to a solution. And
Right.
Instead of having a solution forced on you that you
Right.
didn't really agree to, but you have to do it anyways. And so when that happens, then you do it begrudgingly.
Right. And it's funny, that's a really good point. It sounds like what you're talking about, I think you and I talked about before in our first conversation, is that mediation is a really good process for creating enduring agreements. And whether it's a special needs divorce or whether it's a special education situation, these are situations where there's going to be an ongoing relationship between the parties. We're having a decision or an order or a judgment imposed by a third party is simply not going to create the kind of enduring, trust-based path that mediation will, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think when it's not imposed upon you, you're more willing to trust your partner that you're both going to uphold what you agreed to and more open to tweaking it as it needs to be tweaked going forward, as most parenting plans do. And whether you have special challenges or not, parenting plans should grow as the child grows. And as kids are in school, whether you have a special needs or something changes in that, or medicine changes, or their capability, they're able, being body abled to do things differently, changes, that parenting plan can change.
Right. This is right. This is the whole point, is that these families are finding themselves in a situation where life is very uncertain. Uncertainty is the enemy. It's the great enemy. While every single human being deals with uncertainty and nobody can see the future, this is magnified just countless fold for families that have children with special needs. The future is a really scary place. And anything that gives people some control over the future or lets them play some role in creating possibilities for the future is invaluable. And there's no process worse than that than litigation. And I don't know of a process better than that than mediation, because really what it's about is like you said, creating solutions that will be flexible over time, that will adapt, that will enable them to adapt and adjust as life circumstances change, which they will. whether in divorce or whether in special education, the future is always looming large in these cases. In fact, usually it's looming larger than the present or the past. Oftentimes we are talking a lot about things that happened in the past or things that are happening now.
Right.
Really, what's underneath all this is what's going to happen in the future. And you see that in both of these contexts. That, I laugh when I think that I spent all those years trying to avoid being a divorce lawyer because I didn't want to get involved in divorce cases. But as anybody who practices special education law long enough will tell you, the similarities between special education law and divorce law are really vast. There are so many similarities between the experiences of the parties and the experiences of the lawyers in those cases. And it's really coming down to what you and I are talking about right now. The kinds of problems and the kinds of solutions that are needed are really similar. It's about creating these ongoing relationships that are flexible and adaptable to unusual circumstances. And when the legal system does not provide any sort of path forward for that.
What's interesting, what I like about what you and I each bring to the table, I'm going to pat myself on the back here. I think when you're working in the field of divorce and you have an understanding of the educational system because you've been inside and you've done it, whether it's special ed or mainstream is irrelevant, that you understand the impact of education with divorce, right? Like, because you're sending children into school to do their job as students, knowing they have crisis at home, and to be able to help parents understand that the school system, the teachers, the more information they have, the more you can arm the teachers with and that what your family's going through, and that both parents are open and working together and will take any recommendations they can from the school, is so helpful when you have parents that as a mediator, you've gotten them to a place where they're open to receiving information from their teachers. They're open from taking criticism or constructive criticism. And that's one thing I really like about the role, at least I have, and I know you have, is when you've been in the inside, you really kind of can bring a different level of awareness for the parents.
Yeah, and I think, do you find, I think I definitely find this, do you find that your prior experience helps you have credibility and establish trust with the families that you work with? They know that you understand.
Absolutely. I mean, as having been a teacher, having been a therapist, like that helps people understand that I get it emotionally. I get it personally, having been divorced. I understand students' needs. I understand how the school system works. I understand IEPs and all those things that are to benefit children. And you understand how to navigate the school platform in a way that I think other people who haven't been in the system don't get.
Right. And we know what happens if they don't reach an agreement.
Yes.
And that's really valuable. I mean, as a lawyer, look, I worked with so many families, and so much of what I did was really trying to convince families to settle their cases with school districts. In so many cases, it was so rare that there was a situation where litigation was actually in their best interests. I'm not going to say it never happens. It does happen from time to time. However, so much of what I was trying to help them understand is, all right, listen, here's the reality of what happens if we don't reach an agreement. This is what the litigation process is going to be like. And it could be in the divorce. This is what the divorce litigation process is going to be like. You need to have as much of a perspective, an accurate perspective of what that's going to be like, so you can make an informed decision about whether you want to take that path or not. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't going to candy coat that for them at all. The divorce law, the special education law, you'd almost wonder and think, did the people designing these laws design it in a way that was actually designed to force people to try anything other than this process dispute? Was this designed to be a last resort when all other options fail kind of solution? Because if it wasn't, they did an amazing job making it so.
Right.
Special education law, you don't have to spend too much time in that world to realize that you couldn't come up with a legal structure that was better suited to shove people into mediation than, because when you, and this is true for divorce law as well, when you have a legal framework that is built around these mushy words like appropriate and reasonable, that the entire case, the entire legal framework is built around these vague, ambiguous, undefined words, nothing screams stay out of court more.
Right, right.
Right?
And to be able to help parents understand that there's nothing good. You're not going to get any further ahead having litigated something. You can't, I always say, well, you can't litigate a family. Like that's not what family is, right? Family is meant to stick together. You don't have to live together. You don't have to be married, but you have to continue to work together in the best interest of the family, not necessarily just the best interest of the child, but the best interest of the family unit. And I think mediation does that so well. There's no better platform for it.
So, you and I, it seems so obvious when we get to this point, but I think it's good for us to remember, like, we didn't realize this instantaneously. But when you talk to other people about this, you start to get a lot of, yes, of course, this makes so much sense. And so the challenge, I think, for us is, how do we help other mediators? How do we help other lawyers do this work? Because, not every lawyer has a background as a teacher. Not every mediator has a background in education. But we need more people, more trained professionals who are working with the families to be doing this work well, to be providing the parents with the support that they need and the school districts with the support that they need to go through this. So one challenge that we have is, how can we not only help the families and the school districts, but how can we help other mediators and other lawyers do this? That's something that I've been thinking a lot about these days, doing trainings, doing seminars, doing, speaking at conferences, and trying to get people who don't necessarily have a background in this to become competent to do it, and to feel comfortable doing it, and to feel like they can help and then actually are able to help families get through this.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons I wanted to have you on today was really because, I think it's a passion of both of ours. And the more we can speak about it, the more we can put it out there, people will have a resource to turn to contact. I speak about the role of education in divorce all the time, whether it's mainstream or special needs. There is a role for people who are trained in the educational field to help in support of families who are unwinding. Because when you even do a co-parenting plan, whether you have a special needs or whether you have a mainstream child, it's irrelevant. That educational piece has to be in those parenting plans. And a lot of times it's really never even spoken about. It's about who gets what weekend and who's getting a holiday. That's a part of it, but that's not all of it. And education about is it going to be set up the same in both houses? And especially when you have special needs children, the consistency in both homes is so important, especially if you have a child that is autistic. Like, transitioning from one home to another is hard enough, never mind having them be very different homes and the way things play out. And so if you don't really understand that, then I think you're not doing a service to your own divorce. And for the attorneys, if you don't get that, then you send it out. Let somebody help you who kind of gets that and incorporate it into the plan.
Yeah, it's about knowing what questions to even ask.
Absolutely.
People just don't bring it up. If you read a bunch of articles, or took a course in family law in law school, you might never encounter the whole question of educational decision making, right?
Absolutely.
Alone special education decision making, that might never even come up. And those are just the educational pieces. I mean, there's really tricky, and I think this is why a lot of lawyers stay away from this, because you realize there's a lot you don't know. And when as a lawyer, when you realize there's a lot you don't know, you get very careful about, I don't want to mess this up. This is a field. I don't even know what questions to ask. So what I did recently, when I wrote an article for a mediation newsletter, I put together a list of questions that need to get asked, because it all starts with knowing what questions to even, what issues to even bring up.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about education right now. There's lots of others too, right? There's the estate planning issues. What are we going to do about a guardian? What are we going to do about our wills? Special needs trusts. How do we make sure that our child doesn't inherit money that makes them ineligible for medical assistance,
Mm-hmm.
right? College planning. There's very simple issues like, how is the custody schedule going to affect what school district the child is eligible to attend?
Absolutely.
What happens if we get into a dispute? What if we decide that we want to send our child to private school? Who's going to pay for that? To what extent is the school district responsible for paying for that? Right? These can be very significant issues in a divorce. If you have, a big tuition bill that's coming due every month, it would be helpful to know whether some entity other than the parents have any responsibility for paying that bill.
That too, but when you bring that up, one of the things I remember I've come across this a lot is, if something happens to me,
yes,
who is going to take care of my child and all the needs and the financial components to it? Or if something happened to, say, both parents, what happens in those situations? Because these special needs kids, sometimes that's a lifelong.
Exactly.
Obviously the goal would be, as for all of us, that our kids outlive us, right? So
yeah.
If that happens, what happens? And so there is a host of things that typically are not discussed in divorce in general.
Yes. And that's a great example, right?
Yeah.
Because all you have to do is hear that to realize what a profound difference there is between a family with a typically developing child and a family with a child that has a lifelong need that will impede that person's ability to live independently. There's an enormous difference. And if you I've interviewed a lot of families who have gone through divorce, who have children with special needs. And the number one thing that they say was terrifying to them was this thought of, what happens if something happens to me? What happens if something happens to their dad? Who's going to look out for them? They are terrified of the idea of their child becoming institutionalized or becoming a ward of the state.
Or then agreeing on it.
Or not agreeing on it.
Agreement is very challenging on that.
Right. And exactly. So I think what ends up happening is, even very, thoughtful, sophisticated parents who do think about this are terrified.
Yeah.
And just don't, they feel like they can't deal with this. In the midst of dealing with the divorce, they can't deal with this really scary, existential, heavy, terrifying question. And yet, this is the time that it just has to get dealt with. These questions you need people working with them that are sensitive to these issues, who have helped other families through them before, who can help these families see that there are ways of dealing with this. It's not a hopeless solution, and that having some kind of a plan is always going to feel better than having no plan at all. So while it's very scary, and it is, having people who understand the options and who know the way forward, that's really valuable.
Yeah, you can't that's what parents need. They need that hand holding about the vision of what the future is going to look like, the vision of what now looks like.
Right.
And the vision that it will all change.
Yeah,
right. And as we said earlier, the flexibility with that. So Josh, this has just been a great conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been terrific.
I could go on. I could sit here all day and just go on and on. So there's so much to say. I hope people who are watching this will take a pause, get thinking, and reach out to people such as yourself, myself, and the very few others who are out there who are trying to do this work, because it's a necessity in the area of divorce. It's a necessity in keeping families united, maybe not living together, but united in the vision of what's in the best interest of their children.
Thanks, Colleen. Yeah, thank you so much for devoting time to this topic. And I hope that the people watching realize that they're not alone, that there are people thinking about this, and that to the people out at home who are watching this, your experiences are really essential to helping not only you, but other people as well. So do reach out, keep the conversation going with us. I would love to hear from anybody out there who is going through this and who has perspectives on it, because we're kind of creating this process together.
And I will put Josh's information and his bio below. You'll find how to connect with him. And Josh, you just want to give a shout out to how to connect with you going forward?
Sure. My website is www.educadr, that's Educator, that stands for Educational Alternative Dispute Resolution.com. And my email address is josh@educator.com, josh@educadr.com.
Thank you, Josh. And, take a look at Josh's website, reach out to him if you have any questions, reach out to me if you need anything. And Josh and I will be back in touch for sure. I think we're going to have a part 2 to this conversation. So Josh, thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed our conversation. It's nice to always connect with like-minded people and to learn some things going forward.
Same here, Colleen. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.